Do you mind pen there?
This is my pen.
No, that was on my thing when you started drawing. Now. Are we good?
Yeah.
If you could let us know if you can hear us and see us okay, that would be great. Ideally, what are you doing?
Do this for back. So,
okay, for someone who wishes, we already
have a question. We're not even ready yet.
We're not even ready. We're asking about the audio and video, right?
Okay, so we're sitting here. We're talking. That's not bad.
Can it hear it? Yeah, I can definitely hear it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into the question. So, for someone who wishes to barbell squat but has problems with both flexibility and glute stroke upper quad strength, would both parallel squats be a reasonable place to start?
No.
Two things. No. You need to learn how to back squat first. Like, parallel squats or squats parallel with a narrow stance are really, really good for quad strength. They're exceptionally good for that, particularly if you're unstable. But no, you need to start with full range of motion back squats with very, very low weight, and that's where you start, or no weight at all. And that's where you start, and you go from there. Don't start with a derivative of the lift.
Do you know that?
Yeah, will I get you one?
No, you don't need it, but you just want to have it, like.
Yeah, because what happens if I want to write something down?
Well, you want to.
Okay. Neil Trainer, what are you writing down?
Questions, so I remember what they were.
See, this is it.
But what are you writing down?
Questions.
You're not going to be editing the fucking video.
Okay. What are some possible causes for much weaker front squat versus my back squat? And number one is just having very, very weak legs. Number two is being bad at front squatting and not practicing the front squat. And then number three, I would say, is like your overall squat mechanics could just be pushing you more towards a back squat than it would be towards a front squat.
Did you skip a question? Oh, you missed Sylvan. Okay. So what are possible causes for a much weaker front squat versus my back squat? So obviously number one is just not doing enough front squats. So a lot of times people just, for example, if you saw Hayden's, you saw his he maxed out his front squat the week after he kind of did all his maxes, and he maxed out on his front squat. So he did, his OPV was like 170, and he hit 160, it was very easy, went 180 and failed it incredibly miserably. Might not even make 170. So even if your back squat could be very strong, your front squat could be limited by lack of practice, poor technique, poor mobility, or poor upper body strength, for example. So lack of core strength, upper back strength, mid back strength. And you may also, less likely, but possible, is just not very well built for front squats also, but that's a less likely scenario.
Sylvan says, training till failure on isolation exercises or like bodybuilding exercises, ? I'm assuming you're asking if it's like good. It's a good way of getting fatigued. It depends what you're trying to do with isolation exercises. Assuming it's purely for hypertrophy, then you can dive into as many debates between going till failure versus linear progression of overall volume. Like, you can dive into as much of that stuff as you want. Going until failure probably isn't necessary, and especially if you're a weightlifter or powerlifter, going until failure might be inhibitory to you doing your main lifts. So what I would do is just start your accessory work with moderate volume, moderate intensity, and then just increase that over the course of 6 or 8 weeks.
You should certainly be getting within 80% of failure for your, if you imagine for example, you're doing, I'm going to close one actually. So you should certainly be getting within kind of 80% of failure. So if you imagine you're doing barbell rows, for example, you're doing 5 by 10. Most of the sets you'd want to be getting within a range where you probably couldn't do, you could probably do 2 more reps, but that would be it, So going to failure, seems priceless. It doesn't seem to weigh up well against the cost. Certainly not for people watching this. So if you're not purely hypertrophy, so if you are strength training oriented for whatever reason, it doesn't seem like it would make sense to do that. You get most of the benefits from getting very close to failure, like 80% of the way there, 85% of the way, rather than going all the way to failure. I think the consensus from the literature at the moment is that it's kind of like volume is the big driver, and that the the kind of training to failure is still out or still not conclusive either way. You certainly need to be using a reasonable weight unless you want to be using too much volume. To obviously the more weight you use, the less volume you can, but also need to use. So if you're clean and jerky 180 kilos, barbell rows at 40 kilos aren't going to cut it. If you're front squatting 220, like barbell rows with 40, 50 kilos just won't do that for you. If you're back squatting, belt squats with 15 kilo dumbbell isn't going to really give you any stimulus, I'd say, realistically. So you obviously need to be weighting them appropriately. That's my answer.
Where's this question? Oh yeah, Mark A asks, is Catalyst Athletics book a good way to learn snatch, clean and jerk? I'm not sure. Did you ever watch The Big Bang Theory?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, a few episodes. Not really.
My father's obsessed with it.
Go on.
But basically, it's a load of physicists living in a house, and Sheldon teaches himself how to swim by reading a book.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, learning snatch and clean and jerk from a book isn't ideal. You want to go to an in-person coach is the number one way. But so, I think what you're trying to get to here is is their system of teaching the lifts good? I don't know. I haven't.
I remember actually the UL has the book.
I've read that book.
Yeah, so I've looked at the book.
I can't remember what their system for teaching the lifts is. I think in general, teaching the lifts as full snatch and full clean and jerks first. Usually don't going for a top-down approach works quite well. But it just all depends on you. It depends on your athletic background. Depends where you are. Depends how far you actually want to get in the sport. If you're just somebody who goes into the gym every so often, you want to try snatch and clean and jerks, that's very, very different from a talented 16-year-old who might want to snatch 150 kilos someday.
I don't remember being particularly impressed by the book. It's what my only memory of it, and that was probably about 8 years ago at this stage. So take that for what you will.
Yeah. Okay. Elijah Wokes says, looking tanned, chaps.
Nice.
Thanks very much. Is there any carryover for doing sprints when it comes to power for weightlifting? So I assume now you're talking about this in the context where you're a weightlifter and you're looking to be more powerful, and then you're looking to see will doing sprints make you more powerful? No. Training the lifts depending on you, this is completely individual. Training the lifts at 60 to 80% is your maximum power output bracket. If you want to test where your max power output bracket is, you'll need a dynamometer or a force plate, and you can really simply test it. If you're near university, all strength or all sports science courses will do this at some stage, and usually people look for volunteers for masters and stuff. There's probably 3 of them done in UL every year where they go in and get people's max power output percentage in back squats. So I'd say that's, if you want to find something like that. If you just want to be better at weightlifting, you don't need to be. That's not where you go and look for more power. It's not in sprints, even though they can be very good in an off-season context. So if you're taking a few weeks off weightlifting or a few months off weightlifting and you're just going to do a strength phase, you want to stay moving around a bit, doing some sprints, particularly shorter sprints or hill sprints, short duration, would be very, very good.
Yeah, so there'd be no direct transfer of I ran a 40-yard dash in 6 seconds, and my snatch was 100 kilos, or my power clean was 100 kilos, and then I did a 40-yard dash in 5 seconds or whatever. You're not going to see your power clean then go to 120 or whatever. So you're definitely useful to be physically literate and well-rounded athlete to a certain extent. So have all of your little kind of little columns of dust filled up so each of your proficiency. So you should be able to do 10 pull-ups as a weightlifter. You should be able to do a reasonable, a half an hour walk without dying. things like that. Just like really basic stuff. For sprinting, a little bit would certainly help in the off season. You do see the Russians do it a little bit sometimes. We've seen the Latvians do. Suarez, Riffars mentioned they do the band resisted sprints almost every day or some kind of plyometric training. I don't think every day is a great idea, but it's certainly something. I think it's like just a little thingy. Like I get where you're coming from though. I know what you're asking. You're like, oh, am I going to, if I do sprints, am I going to really speed up my progress? Weightlifting is what the real kind of question I think probably is coming from. And if I can imagine where the person asking the question is coming at this from, realistically, you just can't speed up time in weightlifting and sprint training. So I don't think sprinting will be the shortcut to get you better at weightlifting in any faster than just doing more weightlifting will and year sprint training.
Hubert asks, how do you feel about Tai and Tao being out for the Olympics?
Obviously, it would have made a very interesting weight class for Miso, Plasnoy, Anton. Would have been a great battle. Maybe a bit of snatching for Bodie in there to throw some spanners in the works. I don't think Bodie would have been able to clean jerk with them, but I think obviously it would have been an interesting class for the four of them. It would have been pretty cool. Hopefully he doesn't retire, but in terms of like, how do I feel?
Did you cry that night in bed?
No, I didn't cry that night in bed, surprisingly.
Because I thought you were a bit teary when you came into the office the next morning.
No, that wasn't.
No, hay fever.
That wasn't from Tianto. No, I'm not particularly. I know a lot of people are kind of upset by it and kind of sad and stuff. And I feel bad for him as an athlete, but that's what being an athlete is. I suppose ultimately he had the opportunity to prove himself, and the Chinese didn't think he proved himself. In this scenario, I think it's a very reasonable selection from the Chinese team. It only makes sense, because the 96s would have been incredibly competitive. He hasn't proven that he can be consistent in competition. He hasn't proven that he can bring it. And also, at the Asian Weightlifting Championships, he was not in good shape. Did he clean jerk like 211 or something in Snatch? Was it 175 or so? You minimum needs to be in the 180 or 80s for the Snatch portion. And then clean and jerking 225 plus, if not more, I'd say, to be looking at guaranteeing a medal, let alone a gold medal. So I don't think I don't think it's a smart decision from the Chinese team. If you're just looking at what will the government care about, will the government care about a gold weightlifting battle and one silver, or will the government care about an extra gold if we send someone else? I think it only makes sense to not send him in that regard. It'd be different if he showed up to the AWC, the Asian Championships, and was like blowing 235 out of the water to like 185, 235. You'd be like,
yeah.
You'd be like, okay.
85, 230, I think is you're in very, very, very good chance of getting gold medals with 85, 230. Joe?
Yeah.
Okay, do you have a question there? I have one lined up.
Martin says, how many sets and reps a week on squats count as high volume? For most people, so if we look at pretty much for the vast majority of people training doped or undoped, realistically, you're looking at like twice a week squatting frequency, up to 3 times a week, but it would be kind of dependent on the situation. So if we're looking about just at back squats, we'd be looking at, say, 2 back squat sessions a week, realistically. Your like high volume to me would be somewhere in the region of 40 reps. Anything beyond like 30 reps. No, I may say anything beyond 40 reps to me would be a high volume week of squats of like actual working sets, not including warm up sets, for example.
Okay, next question. There's a bit of meat to this, right? So it's Paul Rowley, and he asks, for GHD back extensions, is there any real difference between holding a plate? So like being feet strapped into the GHD, holding a plate here, I assume, versus having a barbell on your back, is one superior to the other, or should I do whatever is more comfortable? And I might just review the difference between the two, and then Gerf can just give his opinion after. But so there's something major going on here, right? When you look at what's being actually utilized in the GHD, so obviously it's a glute ham developer, but a lot of what we're tending to work, or as weightlifters you tend to work, are spinal erectors, midline stability muscles, and then we have a small bit of glute and hamstrings goes in there too. When we look at the difference between what the plate hold will do versus a barbell on our back will do, it's all about recruitment patterns of those different sets of mid and upper back musculature, right? The thing people don't often think about is the use of their lats in terms of midline stability, particularly for weightlifters. They're obviously hugely important. And when we start externally rotating the shoulders and putting a bar in our back, then that kind of whole schema of muscle recruitment changes. For weightlifters, I prefer them doing it with a barbell. It also pushes the weight up higher, so it makes that lever arm that we talk about all the time much, much longer. And they're less likely to get this kind of rounded in position. Most of the time, if we're getting people to do GHD or back extensions or anything like that, we're trying to open them up, get them to extend, particularly in their T-spine. And the last thing I want someone to do is to round it even more.
I'll be honest with you, I don't get the horn weightlifting coaches have for back extensions. They're like a fairly okay exercise, but I'm not blown away by them in most scenarios. I think there's a lot of better exercises you can do. I actually think prone back extensions are better for most people.
That's what nearly everyone has on the programs.
Like, because you're looking for a contraction of your upper back muscles rather than kind of use your lower back, lose your glutes to swing yourself into position. I don't really get the horn for that. I don't get why people have such an aggressive kind of ideas around that. So I don't think it's much anymore, but a lot of old school weightlifting cultures would love back extensions. They have back extensions, they have back extension abs every single day, which is just not something I think is very useful. A lot of them I think do use it though for back injuries, for example, which is a different scenario. If something helps your back stay injury free or keeps an injury away, or rehabs from an injury, then I'm more than happy to support that, whatever you're doing that for. But in terms of back strength, like I'm much, much more in line with deadlifts, rows, prone back extension, pull-ups, stuff that are much more specific, stuff that has actual contraction in your upper back rather than looking for static holds or whatever. So we know static holds aren't really the best for building muscle or improving strength in most scenarios. So I'd much prefer something where you're contracting, and most of the time you just see people get a lot of momentum in GHD back extensions. Also, they're just a bit of a balls to set up, like you're saying, with the barbell on your back. My favorite back extension is actually on the 45-degree back extension, but you just don't see a gym with them ever anymore. They're just not a thing. So that's why GHDs are the most popular.
GHDs are only popular because CrossFit gyms have them.
Yeah.
Like if you're there,
I mean, actually,
it's in a few years, people will be like, "Oh yeah, I love using the ski ergs in the gym."
Yeah,
and be like, the only reason your ski erg is there is because of CrossFit.
I'd actually prefer 45. I would count in my head 45-degree back extensions are much different to GHD back extensions.
For me, it goes reverse hyper machine, 45-degree, and then an actual GHD. Okay, next one. Wondering how to reduce tendonitis or tendon injury stream back, mainly due to rugby on 3G pitch. We don't do any injury questions. It's like the rule of the channel. It's the rule of us for a huge amount. We don't deal with injury questions. We don't deal with specific issues. But tendonitis is an interesting thing when you bring it up there, because most people and almost everyone listening to this, when they will have dealt with tendonitis, it's a loading issue or it's a repetitive strain issue, injury of some sort. Tendon issues and tendon injuries do come about through impact. So the example of an athlete's ankle getting pinned in the ground, or their boot with cleats on getting pinned in the ground, and then their knee moves and they might do some tendon or ligament damage. Those kind of discrete injuries are very, very difficult to protect against. The main kind of thing you're looking for there is some sort of functional movement screening to ensure full range of motion and normal range of motion in an athlete. Then you're looking at just absolute strength of the athlete, so someone who's very, very strong generally. And then the last thing you're looking for is like coordination, skill, and balance. So making sure that the athlete isn't cumbersome or bringing about injuries through their own fault. The thing I would say here is like the rugby 3G pitch comes up a fair bit, and we've been asked about a 3G pitch before, and we've been toying, like it's in the Instagram DMs, and we've been toying around with the idea of doing a video on it, right?
That is. Oh,
yeah, AstroTurf. Yeah. So 3G pitches obviously have their own list of issues, right? If you're playing rugby on it, one of the main issues is actual contact with the ground. So we see higher rates of certain kind of injury modalities on 3G pitches that you don't tend to get on natural grass. But you also get this slightly separate thing of your coefficients of friction are very, very different between a 3G pitch and a boot and a grass pitch with sod underneath it and a boot. And I would just say generally, like, this isn't injury advice, but you look at general movement, general coordination and skill, and absolute strength. That's what I'd really be looking at. And as the last sweeping statement, like staying away from balsa balls, med balls, air cushions, floating clouds that you put underneath your ass to make you balance more. Like, you could throw all of that stuff away. You've already spent 85 grand on it, 10 foot by 10 foot piece of 3G. So you don't need that stuff. Like, you need general, actually strong athletes who can move around the place.
Okay, I'm just gonna face the camera there. Okay.
Classic.
It's classic.
Classic. Yeah.
So
it's
next
perfect.
question is, how do you basically program running and lifting together?
What are you asking me?
You're gonna have to. This is your one.
Where's the question?
So it's Roel van der Acker. Roel van den Acker.
Van den Acker. We're terrible at pronouncing names. Sorry about that.
Dutch. I feel like that's Dutch.
What is it? How do you guys like to program concurrent training, running and lifting?
Can I actually have?
Like,
I have an existential question or a bit down about this before you get into specifics. If you
Go
want,
on.
if you would.
Go on. I'm gonna love this.
You're gonna take a break for a second.
Now sunglasses.
No, they're my sunglasses. It's like you stole my biro. So my issue with this, right, is pick. This is a thing we've talked about a lot before. Okay, now it's your own life. It's your own training system. It's your own training goals. This is all up to you, whatever you do with your training. But in my experience, and for a lot of people, now there's definitely a lot of people who want to do different things, and that's fucking, again, just can't reiterate. But if you have goals in certain things, you just got to be willing to let things go, like let other stuff go. Like, if lifting or powerlifting is your thing, just accept that you can also fucking run as well, realistically, most of the time. For a lot of people, it's just not a really feasible thing. We do see people try and make hybrid things, and like the super total thing is possible, but that's even difficult in terms of powerlifting and weightlifting.
And that's both two strength work. Like,
they're both two strength sports, and you do a lot of that stuff for weightlifting anyway. When we look at things like running and powerlifting, you have the interference effects, and sports scientists will call it like a hypothesis. But it's, for anyone who tries it knows it's a real thing. Like, it's real. Like, there is certainly very, very defined things where running just isn't good for powerlifting. Powerlifting will be good for your running. Your powerlifting rarely will impact your running negatively. But I think just kind of just consider, are you trying to be the kind of all-around athletic person? Some people kind of have this ideal. I'm not taking shots at Roel, because loads of people are like this. I don't know Roel from anyone. Like, I don't know.
If anything, he's targeting me.
If I don't know Roel from Adole, like, I don't know anyone like Joe. I'm just saying, consider why it is what you want to do, and obviously, if that's what you want to do, then fucking plow ahead. Like, I'm not saying don't do it, but just think about: is this a thing that I love? Long distance running, I love powerlifting, or is it a thing that I love the idea of being able to do both of them? But in reality, do you acknowledge it's feasible? And probably the most important thing, Roel, is just acknowledge that you're going to severely cap both of those. Not severely cap, but you're going to cap a lot of your progress for both of those. And certainly what you'll do is not only will you cap the uppermost process or the uppermost limit of your talent for these, you'll also really elongate the time it takes to you to get to this kind of final cap place when you're doing both of them together.
Yeah, I really agree with what Kerf's saying there. Actually, one thing I wouldn't agree with is he's saying powerlifting probably won't negatively affect your running.
Most of them, yeah.
Like, powerlifting will definitely, it just depends what vigor you go after that.
Yes. Well, a little bit will help.
A little bit will definitely help, but then it becomes strength and conditioning for running. But there's a few issues here, right? First thing is training 6 times a week. So you want to be an okay athlete training more than most good athletes train, right? So you might be a genetic anomaly, or you might have a huge bank of training behind you. For a lot of people, that kind of training volume means that they're really pushing in one direction, or they're really, really dialed in, or they have a lot of training done. So that's the first thing I look at, is 6 times a week may not be necessary. The next thing then you need to look at is I'm going to use myself as an example here because I know the numbers and numbers will come back to me easily, right? But if we just equate this down to what you actually want to achieve, so you say long distance, so we can assume half marathon to full marathon, 24 to 48K, or 42K, sorry, not 24, 21 to 42 kilometers as your running distance, and then strength training, squat, bench, and press, right? If you want to be okay at both, you need to look at numbers that you're actually going to be happy with, and numbers matter so much, right? We're all about process, all about enjoying the training, enjoying what you're doing at the time, but you need numbers that you want to hit. If you were to say double body weight back squat, 2.5 times body weight deadlift, and a 1.5 times body weight bench press as being good numbers, and if you were to say, I have no idea what a good marathon time would be, if you wanted to be at
2 hours apparently.
If you wanted a 3.5 hour marathon, right? What you're going to look at is all of those on their own, right? Even if you wanted just the strength numbers, to get all 3 of those strength numbers up would be incredibly difficult. The 3.5 hour marathon on its own is a whole other feat. And what you're going to see between those 4 numbers is a huge contrast in both training style and training volume over the course of a training block. So you're going to be hugely high volume in your powerlifting when you necessarily won't have very high volume in your run training. You're going to be wanting to gain weight at certain points in powerlifting when you're probably going to want to lose weight during your run training. There's just a host of things going on that are very, very contradictory. That being said, it's definitely doable, but you do need to have a realistic idea for what's going on. So in my case, I wanted a 5-minute mile and a 500-pound squat, and I didn't do it. So like the closest I got was like 522 on a like slight downhill on a training session, and a 300 and something pound back squat. But both of those things were things I'd done before, you know. I had been in very, very good shape for running for a long time. Now, granted, that had been around 6 or 7 years previously, and I had been very, very strong or not very, very strong, but in relation to that goal, I had squatted 300 pounds probably 3 or 4 times before that. Or 500 pounds, sorry, what the fuck? So me squatting 230 and me running a 5-minute mile had been done before, just not on the same day. So all of my training was just getting me back to there. And when you look at other people who do that kind of hybrid model of training, they've usually gotten to a certain point with specific training on its own, and then this concurrent style of training just gets you back to a certain level, and you might be able to top off certain silos, you might be able to add certain things, but most of the time you're doing it, you've really gone hard down a certain road and achieved a certain thing, and then you go hard down a certain road and achieve that, and then you bring about this kind of concurrent training model or this hybrid training model. But it's very difficult to actually get genuinely better at both things at the same time.
Even Ethan Putter. So, just not ragging again on Roll. I know I said a lot of times this question, but I just feel like...
Oh, but it's a great question.
It's a very good question.
Yeah.
It's very common. But, like, I know you said okay both, but most people, and you know, this is for generic people, because I'll put this up in YouTube as well, because other people will be listening to this as well. So, in Roll's case, he's like, oh, I just want to be okay both. That's certainly possible. Like, you know, you can very feasibly squat 180 and run a 6-minute mile without some crazy work, you know, that's possible for people.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit more than 6-minute mile, kind of. But, you know, the okay boat is possible. But most people in reality, we might like ourselves, but most people want to be better at everything, you know, want to keep getting better. Most people aren't happy if they're just maintaining stuff. So just knowing people, knowing athletes, you know, you just have to admit what is probably going to end up happening. So Killian says, should I program squats on their own separately to my weighting program if I need to really focus on my squat? So, Killian, I don't know if you've ever seen Project Chavez, where he says things like, now that's not a great question. This, I suppose...
Project would say, now that's a dumb question.
So that's not a dumb question, Killian, just before
Gareth is calling out, like,
before I accuse you of that. I think the issue there is, when you say, you know, program squats on their own. I know what you mean, but it sounds like you're saying, you know, it's all part of the program, even if you don't kind of do it concurrently. So like what you're kind of saying, I suppose, is what you probably should be asking is, should I hyper focus on squats to the detriment of my lifts if I need to focus on my squat? Now, there's kind of like two scenarios that usually beginner to intermediate lifters will end up in this. It will be either you are not able to both bring up your lifts and your squats, or you'll make the conscious decision to put yourself into a scenario where you're doing a very, very distinct strength phase. Now, usually what happens is most people should be well able for bringing up your squats and your lifts at the same time if your programming is smart. I'd say 90% of our lifters will always be progressing their snatch, their clean jerk, and their squat unless they're coming up to competition. But for other training blocks, and they're always progressing through, you can very, very feasibly bring up your squat and your snatch, clean jerk at the same time. I don't think you should ever really, more than once a year, really focus on a hyper strength phase where you're just at the detriment to your snatch and your clean and jerk, bringing up your squats by themselves, as oftentimes you still need to hyper develop your ability to do the skills of the snatch, clean, jerk, because most people in these scenarios don't have that skill set developed very well. You don't have that. Something I didn't get only until, honestly, the last few months, and it's been nearly a decade of weightlifting, was something, it just takes time to learn how the lifts feel. Like, it takes so long to really get what the lift feels like. And I can only describe the feeling in my head. It's like an amorphous cloud in my head of what that means. But when I say it out loud, it doesn't make as much sense. And I've heard Luz Aljon talk about this in some interviews, saying, you know, he knows what it should feel like now. Gabriel has talked about it. He's like, every year you lift, you learn more than the last year. And I'm always thinking about this. And it's only recently that I've really figured out what the lift should feel like. But this took such a long time, and it's such a hard concept. It sounds so simple, but it takes so long for you to figure it out. What you're really looking for is, how did the lifts feel without you consciously thinking about it? And I don't really think for most lifters, bar maybe once a year for maybe a 6 to 8 week period, should you really pull yourself away from the lifts to focus on squats. You should realistically be able to push both of them. The only scenario I'd say is if you're looking at clean and jerking 120, right, and your front squat is like 120 for a single or a double or something, then I think there's a reasonable time to give there's a reasonable argument there to put yourself in a scenario where you kind of start off your squat, but where you focus on that squat. But in that scenario, you're literally giving yourself a head start in your squat to bring back in the lifts and then keep progressing both of them. So very rarely would you put yourself in a position where you are progressing your snatch and not progressing your squat, and then you progress your squat and your snatch. Very, very rarely does that ever happen. We're always trying to look to do both of those. So some scenarios, I've had a lifter or two where we just needed to give them a couple of weeks to hammer some squats for a couple of weeks, and then we bring back in their lifts, and then we keep progressing their squats. So it's like a way of just getting a little kickstarter, because they're not as good as they could be at squats, but then we'll always progress in with the idea that we're trying to progress both of them. So very rarely, I think, is it productive for amateur intermediate lifters to take a load of time out and just focus on their squat, other than for a few weeks of the year. But that then is with the idea that you're going back and hammering a load of the lifts and the squats at the same time for the rest of the year. So I'd say be very, very cautious with ever taking away a lot of time from the snatch and clean and jerk for your squats, when if you're smart about it, you can very, very feasibly progress both of them at the same time.
Okay. Next, we have James Gallagher, currently on week 6 of your pull program and enjoying it. After I run this, I want to do other programs. Wonder if I can run push and squats programs at the same time or separately. Yeah, so the Sika pull, Sika strength RTA, the Road to Anywhere squat program, and the X press, the benching and the strict pressing program are all written that they can be run concurrently or run with additional programs in next to them. So you can certainly do it. I would definitely wait until you finish the pull program, purely due to the fact like you felt how difficult it is. Like, it's a hard program to do, and the RTA is harder. So just be conscious of that.
Sorry, keep talking there. So
just be conscious of that. Finish out your pull program now. The press and the RTA run into each other quite nicely. So they kind of work very well together. Obviously, you're not going to be...
Keep talking. Forget it.
I'm so confused.
Just keep talking.
But yeah, that's basically it. As we're on this point, let's reiterate again, we don't answer injury questions. If your knees are sore and it feels like tendonitis, you probably have tendonitis and you need to go to the doctor. You started?
Yeah, but just focus on the questions.
So, in general, don't be putting in injury questions. Like, we'll try and help out. If your knees are sore, you need to go to a physiotherapist or a physical therapist and get your knees looked at. If it's at the point where your knees have been sore for a long time, then what you need to do is you need to go and get an MRI on your knee. And you need to figure out if you have something along the lines of tendinopathy, which is degradation of the tendons to a point whereby you're not really going to get it back. And then you need to look at a much, much more serious thing. If your knees are sore and you're still squatting, you don't need to be watching, like, no YouTube video is going to fix your knees for you. Like, you need to go and get your knees sorted by a professional.
You go to Sika.com and find the, I'll probably post it there and just get the shop link, right? And then just post it and say something. And then just pin that comment to people.
So seekerstrength.com.
Yeah, and just go to programs, right? And I'll just put down.
Sorry for this minor delay. Which one do you want?
Just post the link all and just clap it in.
Okay, and go here.
Yeah, say something. See if you can pin that.
You have to put it up first and then pin it.
And here, enter.
Marvelous. Okay.
So Pablo Lambert's next question is thoughts on Ronny Coleman's training methods from back in the 90s and what may have caused his current back problems he suffers with now. So obviously, just what caused him was extremely intense, mind-numbing, intense, crazy, absurd training. If you listen to what I think caused it, was obviously just that insane training, like just that to the level of intensity. Probably not paying a huge amount of attention to probably rehab and prehab stuff. We haven't seen any other lifter basically in the world end up as crippled as him. So what I probably think was there's probably some genetic issues with his back that was very highlighted from the intense training, and then probably not paying a whole amount of attention to the issues that were arising at the time. If you listen to him, he said the only thing he regrets is not going for a set of 5 on 800 pounds instead of 2 reps. I think the consensus a lot of people would think though is that he probably didn't really need to do that kind of training. A lot of the like 2 reps 800 pounds isn't going to be productive. However, I suppose at the same time, people saying this also haven't won like 8 Olympias or whatever he won. Yeah, like the people calling him out on it are not calling him out. People are saying he doesn't need to do it. Also, don't have that many Olympias, so it's kind of hard to say who's correct. But realistically, it's very unlikely that training was necessary for him to do that. He could have definitely done a lot safer training.
Ronny was strange because Ronny was a bodybuilder who was also lifting more than the powerlifters. You know, like it was kind of in that era where the line between the two was very, very marred.
Well, he was certainly in better shape than the powerlifters were in the 90s.
Oh my god!
And the early 2000s.
But
the fat mess.
Like no big bodybuilders really get that kind of training now. You know, like it's much more refined, and that they're obviously bigger and in better shape than he would have been. So it's the 90s. You know, like people died in car crashes that would be simple fender benders today. Things were very, very different. I think you have to talk about the drugs with Ronny Coleman as well, because the drugs wouldn't have, like, if there was no drugs, he wouldn't have lifted like that. But I certainly wouldn't be concerned that if you were doing a bit of bodybuilding or a bit of powerlifting that you'd ever get an injury akin to that. I just, for most of us, squatting 800 pounds for reps isn't going to be a real thing. Okay, how do you recover from heavy training weeks, especially how to help the feeling of overall CNS fatigue?
So there's reduced intensity and volume in your training to give yourself an opportunity to recover. So you've taken care of your training aspects. You are getting plenty of sleep. You're eating adequate nutrition, which covers all your macro and micronutrient needs. And that's it. That's all you can do. There is...
limit stress as well.
Limit stress, well, yeah. So which is probably one of the most useless recommendations you see for any form of disease or cure or recovery. like limit or just get less stress. People that like teeth clenching are like, just stress yourself less. Thanks, bro. That's a great help. Yeah, I'll just reduce my stress, which I've had for the last however many years.
If you're an athlete, and you're going to be doing this for the next decade,
if you're professional, you have to.
Yeah, if you're a professional or you're whatever, like, you know, there's plenty of full-time athletes who aren't professional, you know, but and like the thing of reducing stress, I say it because it's kind of a joke, like, Joe, like, reduce stress, just be less stressed. But if you're an athlete and that's the kind of decision you're making, like if you're a college athlete now and you want to go and try and be professional, like you need to take steps in your life that are going to cut out stress. And that's like, stop texting that boyfriend or girlfriend who are driving you mental.
You horse.
Yeah, because I was on a call this morning and then on the live stream, and this always happens to me.
So like an example of like reducing stress would be, I remember when Stan Efferding was coaching Brian Shaw to some strongman competition. They talked about, you know, Shaw had a newborn, and what they did was they got like a stay-in nanny for like the month before. So every night, rather than Brian being like, okay, I'm gonna have to go tend to my newborn child or whatever, the nanny would just stay in the room and do whatever it needs to do. So that's an example of reducing stress. Professional athletes make those callous decisions that are somewhat, you know, would appear pretty callous to most people in the outside world. So in reality though, most people can't really do stuff like that or won't. It's not worth the payoff to recover from training or have less stress for training, you know. But that's an example.
Okay, Jaka Ingles. Hopefully we pronounce your names phenomenally incorrectly. It says, hello, finally caught you guys live. It's great to see you on the stream. Okay, next one is from Albu. What would you expect from a young average male, 170 to 180 centimeters in height, average vertical jump, etc., in snatch, clean and jerk? What could 99.99 of those people do if they train properly? Can I go first and then you can go?
Okay.
99.999% of people will do very, very poor numbers because they won't go and get a coach. They won't stick with training long enough to get good lifts. And they won't just do the things you need to do, which is basically being miserable to be a weightlifter all the time, as in Gurf. But my honest answer is I think 99.9% of people won't make it to 100, 120 unless they have a good coach.
I think like the best numbers you could probably hope for being like an average male. I think like the best thing you could ever really hope for like, and this is just you actually made the effort to be good at weightlifting, bar taking drugs. You did everything bar taking drugs. Honestly, I think like 120, 150 is amazing work. And before, if you'd asked me this 5, 6, 7 years ago, I'd been like, sure, most men can probably get to 120, 150, no problem. But time has worn me down, and people have worn me and my patience away. And I think most average men, but you know, whatever that means, whatever you want to take to be, I generally don't think can barely get to 120, 150 with many years training, let alone get beyond that. So I think if you get, you know, this is kind of a how long is a piece of string question, but I think if you got to like 120, 150, you're doing pretty good, you know. And I know I might see a lot of people on Instagram doing this or a bit more than a lot more, but they're the kind of they're the lads who could do it. So it's kind of a positive user bias or whatever, or positive user effect, or you know, we're seeing people who are able to do it. For most people, 100, 105 snatch is a really good snatch to get to. 110 is actually very good going, like a 130 clean and jerk. Now the difference between kind of 105 and 130 and like 120 and 50 doesn't sound a whole lot, but believe you me, that's about 10 years of training for a lot of people. It's interesting because I would have thought a couple of years ago, I genuinely would have thought a lot of people could get to 120 and 50 pretty well, but in reality, people just can't.
Yeah,
which is a shame, but
it's just the nature of it as well. Like,
yeah.
I think the thing is, like, a lot of people don't recreationally sprint. You start to look at the amount of people who could do like close to Olympic level sprints. Like there's almost none, and people wouldn't expect it.
Yes,
because people know like that. Oh no, I'm not type 1 versus type 2. My ratios are off. You know.
Yeah.
They've heard all of this.
Yeah.
But then because everyone goes to the gym, they're like, oh no, I'll be able to, if I train really hard, I'll be able to make it.
Yes.
I feel like I'm being really cynical today.
No, but we talked about this with Seb in these podcasts, and we're coaching Seb to get to 120, 150 at the moment, and I'll tell you a good indicator if you were going to be a good weightlifter. If you don't get to at least 100, 120 within the first 14 months, you're just not going to be a good weightlifter. Yeah. If you don't get to 120, 150 within the first 3 years, you're definitely not going to be a good weightlifter. And that's just the experience what we've seen from natural lifters who start in their late teens, for example, which is kind of a lot of people at the moment, or not a lot of people, but some people at the moment. So if you don't get there within 3 years, chances are you're just not going to get any further, because you think about the rate of progress just won't go that fast. If you don't get to that, it just seems likely that you'll never be able to do more. Now, if you get to that, it doesn't mean you're going to be a good weightlifter, but it certainly means that you have the possibility to get to like 140, 180 kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I got to 100, 120 within like a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I was not a good weightlifter.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you can't.
I think I had 100 after 9 months, I'd say, with a break at Christmas between that as well. So I think I had 100, 120 after about 9 or 10 months. And I've seen other good weightlifters who started around me would have gotten very similar to that.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, if you're 60 kilos or whatever, it's a little bit different, but most people beyond 75 kilos should be able to get to something like that if you're going to be a weightlifter, of course.
Are burritos the new PEDs? I hope so.
Burritos are so fucking good.
Oh my god.
That's what the poor the Angelon thing.
Do you think there's ever been an actual case?
No.
Yeah.
Never.
I don't think there's ever been an actual case of meat. There may have been in supplements once or twice, because I know people who've gotten spiked supplements.
You do, I'd say.
And they've definitely been spiked.
I'd say you do.
But I just really don't. Anyway, we're not going to get... Small is Beautiful, which is a phenomenally upbeat username on YouTube.
There's not enough positivity around.
No.
There's not enough positivity.
I feel like I should smile more.
Yeah.
I'm a climber. I'd like to lose some muscle mass in my legs without losing upper body muscle mass.
Well, hang on, stop breathing.
And the ability to do jump style moves from my legs. How do people drop weight classes when lean?
I'm not asking this question. Small is Beautiful. You started off with a great.
We started great.
Great.
There was a great tone.
Yeah.
Really nice. The question wasn't too long, but it wasn't too short either. No exclamation marks.
Small is Beautiful. And then you ask question.
That is.
How much muscle mass do you have to lose? I would say is the answer.
Well, no, like it's a genuine thing, right? If you're super lean, if you're around 12 to 10% body fat, and you are about as lean as you're going to get, and you understand you need to lose some muscle mass, you want to lose it from your legs, you just can't lose muscle mass from wherever you want. What you're going to have to do is you're going to have to put your body into a state where it is atrophying. That state isn't going to be conducive to training. It's not going to be conducive to learning skills. It's not going to be conducive to being a good person or being a fun person to be around. But that's what you have to do, basically. You have to be in this anemic state where you're in a calorie deficit while also not training. So you're not going to be able to stimulate those muscle groups, so your training volume will be drastically reduced, because any stimulation of that muscle group will cause it to hold on longer. So when you look at groups in which this is super common, like horse racing jockeys is a classic case, and it's gruesome. But anyway, you're not going to be able to just lose it off your upper or lower body. One thing I will say is you can go into that calorie deficit, make sure you keep your protein intake quite high, and make sure you keep doing the upper body training you need to do, but you're going to only be able to realistically do a fraction of the upper body training that's possible.
Eli said discouraging, but Conrad corrected him, said rarely encouraging.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So you could obviously, get into that calorie deficit like Fitz said, prioritize a lot of upper body work and then just neglect your lower body stuff. It is a thing in climbing though, from from our peripheral viewership of climbing, is that they do actively try and lose muscle mass in their legs. So just stop doing lower body work, be in a calorie deficit, encourage your upper body to maintain as much muscle mass through stimulus from training, from isolation work, from your climbing work, from your upper back, upper body work, and just simply neglect your lower body, and you will eventually lose that muscle mass.
I have one more thing to say.
Go on.
Not to cut across you. The most important thing and the most mixed up thing people get in these kind of weight class sports is they don't get really accurate measures of body composition. So if this is something you're going to do, right, go and get a DEXA scan. It will cost you, wherever you're living, there'll be a bit of difference, around €100 to €150, and you'll get a really good accurate measurement. If you live near a university, you just get on the university's mailing list of their sports science or their health sciences department, and I guarantee you there will be a study where they're looking for people to come in and get a DEXA as part of it. There was people in university in UL where we were every single day getting free DEXA scans.
I never got a DEXA one. I got this.
Didn't you?
I got the stupid back squat and vertical jump ones.
Oh my God, you dork.
So they were like, we need to squat 180. So I was one of the 3 people on campus that could do it.
But yeah, that's what you need to do. Get a DEXA before you start any of this. Because this will drastically affect your climbing.
Where are we?
We've
lost our position now.
Joke Inglés again. I do weightlifting, but would like to begin Olympic style. Can't afford a coach how necessary it is. It is more necessary than anything else. Like, we turn around people every day who want to start weightlifting, and they're like, oh, I want to start weightlifting. Will I just get the beginner weightlifting program? The beginner weightlifting program is a great place to start, but it's not as important as having an actual coach on the ground in the gym with you. So that's the number one thing. If you do weightlifting and you're like, if you have any other expenses, if you're thinking about buying shoes, thinking about buying gym gear, thinking about buying supplements, thinking about anything, none of those are as important as going and getting a coach. And if you can't get a coach, go get Sika Strength 12-week beginner program.
James wants to know, what other fitness YouTube channels do you watch or recommend? So Ivan Juric, who we had, a lot of people will be happy to know, we had him on the podcast yesterday, so that'll be up today. So we put that up today for Ivan. I was talking about Ivan by accident, but it's Ivan Juric. So we did an interview. Great chat. I enjoyed that one.
Yeah.
So nice. Just
very enjoyed.
It's a little bit less than an hour. We got into, didn't think about training so much, but a lot of heavy existential topics. Talked a lot about video games for some reason, which I didn't see going that way. Talked about life, training. Ivan is a gent. So interesting. A great guest. So look forward to people listening to that one. I hope people get a lot from it. So that'll be up today. Who else I watch? I watched Ryan Dengler. I just watched just for the, you know when you're making breakfast in the morning?
Yeah.
And you're like, pleasant nonsense. Ryan Dengler, check. More plates, more dates, maybe once a week.
More plates, more dates is great.
I'll start some of these videos and I'll be like, oh, he's not saying anything new. He's just reading the emoji comments.
Yeah.
He's just reading the comments, like, just, you know, he seems like a really nice guy. But his videos don't have a lot of diversity in them. So the topics are interesting, but he doesn't really, he needs someone to talk to them with weight, I think.
Yeah.
He needs his more plate. He needs an extra plate, like, or another date.
Another plate.
So it gets a little bit boring sometimes.
He's the only fitness YouTube I watch, I think.
I'm watching the Renaissance Periodization just for, you know, when you're warming up and you like pleasant nonsense in the background.
Yeah, I don't listen to them anymore, really.
But you're not actually listening to anything.
Yeah.
So I'm on, or I think that's about it, really. I don't think I really watch anyone else. I'm not incredibly active with the fitness YouTuber thing.
No. I watch
a whole lot.
I watch reruns of QI.
Yes.
I watch Adam Savage Tested.
Yes.
Between those two things, like, that's all of my hours of YouTube.
I'm watching a lot of
abroad. And I watch Meat Eater as well.
What I'm watching at the moment is that chapter in Abroad in Japan.
Oh, that chapter.
Yeah, it's great.
So good. If you like true crime,
yes,
that chapter.
If you like TV shows and movie, what's the name for when people...
Synopses?
No. It's like an in-depth analysis of the story. There's like a word for that. If you like people when they break down a story, go through not the techniques used, but why things worked. Captain Midnight is a person I watch way more non-fitness related YouTube stuff than I do. I'm also conscious of. Oh, I watch Weightlifting House actually. I always watch
Yeah. Sorry, how did we forget that?
Seb is always great videos, and I like a good Zach rant. But I think both actively try to stay away from other people in the YouTube fitness thing or whatever we're doing, just because you can accidentally kind of get a bleed over or get influence. I want my thoughts to remain virgin and pure.
It's about the only thing.
Unadulterated.
Okay. Erico Oliveira says, how should I structure training after having peaked for 2 of my lifts, bench and deadlifts, but still make great progress in the squats?
Just reset them. That's what I have done.
Just back to volume.
And you can keep progressing one of them. It's not. It sometimes it does happen by accident, I suppose. It's kind of poor planning, but it happens, or not even poor planning, but sometimes it just someone will. Especially it happens a lot in beginners actually, or intermediate lifters, where like you said, you're really good at your bench and deadlifts, so or you're not as good at those actually, I should say. So you go to your natural progressions, you're getting to your 5s and your 3s and stuff, and you get to the end of that progression. What you find in your squat that you might be naturally good at your squatting, Erico, you get to week 8 for all of those lifts, but you find that in your squat you just have an extra 2 weeks of progression left to go. You could definitely keep going with them. I always just get people to keep going with that, and then what we kind of do usually then is it ends up not being more than a week or 2 left in the progression, maybe 2 weeks at the most. So all I do is just kind of simmer those other 2 lifts, keep that peak going for your squat, for example, peak that out, and then reset everything else, and then try next time to get things peaking together. But it's not a huge deal when you're kind of early stage, beginner, intermediate. It does happen. That was a good question, actually. What time is that?
Okay. Is there any chance you could go over how to periodize a cardio-based sport like swimming? Cian Mulligan. Cian, yeah, like people often think periodization is this weightlifting, strength training thing. Like periodization is just a way of planning adaptation. It's the exact same like volume versus intensity. I'll never know. Like it's this X. One is volume. One is intensity.
He's on your chart. What question? What time is it? Who's asking this? Cian.
This is all it is. You start here with high volume and really low intensity. As you go over the course of a training cycle, this might be 4 months. So you might start here, just gradually go along, intensity goes up, volume goes down. That is what it is, right? If you plan out your training, that's not what it's going to look like. It's going to look like a wavy version of that, but you need to think about, like, if you get the line of best fit or squared and put that line through your overall volume, it's going to go in that direction. If you get R squared of intensity, put that line of best fit through, it'll go in that direction. You might have multiple periods of this, so you might reset, as Gerf was just talking about there, where you reset, you go back to high volume, low intensity, and you go again. But that's, periodization works in the exact same manner. And it's almost always that model of periodization. It's very, very, very rarely reverse linear regression model periodization. Almost never. Is there?
What time do you
2 o'clock.
But you have to upload the video ready.
I have the video nearly ready to go, but I've Wi-Fi in there. So I'll just upload that. Okay. Vardan Shardery.
Yeah. We got this in the Instagram live the other day, remember? He was asking about should he
we did, yeah.
Do basically the short answer was he should just get into industry and start working. While probably doing some smaller courses rather than going for a full bachelor's again, which is not really worth it. You're just holding yourself back for ultimately what you need is experience.
I'd also get like sports jobs on the side, like go work in a gym off the floor and stuff, and figure out if sports science is what you want to do.
We might just get the Tom. So we're just going to, I think fit test go in a minute. So we're just going to get the few highlight questions there. So Tom is a good question. Lots of masters lifters, right? Any advice for masters lifters? So that's 60 minutes, right?
You have a load of masters lifters, don't
Too
you?
many masters lifters, right? Okay, so this really depends on what, from what I've seen, right, is what that masters lifters has done in a previous athletic life. So if you were lucky enough to get a talented masters lifter who has done a lot of stuff before, the problem is it even depends on what kind of sport they did before. So a good example is I have a masters lifter who is 44, 45. He's going to the Masters World Games next year, which is a separate thing entirely, where they have like a couple of sports at the Masters World Games.
No way.
Was a thing. So he used to be a collegiate track athlete in America, and then he did Masters over 30 athletics, which was great. And then a couple of years later, he started weightlifting with me. So a couple of months ago, he is very talented, right, and it's very useful. However, so one of the downfalls of that is he has picked up some sensitive injuries over the years. In particular, his lower back has those issues. So we can load his volume and intensity like we would with a normal lifter. We just figure out the maxes or whatever, and then we progress that. However, what we've seen happen with my man is that he back can very easily flare up. Sometimes without, so we'll solve one symptom of the back injury or solve one source, and then a training cycle and a half later that will flare up. So the advice is be ready for that to happen, be psychologically ready for that to happen, be psychologically resilient enough that when you're coming back that you have the patience. And he has a great where you're just like, oh, my back went right, this is just part of my training as a 40-odd year old lifter, and so I just go, okay, we just start progressions again. You just restart the training block and go real slowly, and then you try and figure out what the source of that is, whether the back issue was or your knee issue or whatever the injury was. You try to figure it out, try to fix it, and you can fix them. You for sure can fix them. It's not a thing in your 40s where you're unfixable, things won't recover. You definitely can, but you just have to be ready for that to happen. My advice is though, don't hold back so much on thinking, a master's lifter, I can't recover enough, I can't train a lot. From what I've seen, recoverability and training intensity is very similar to most intermediate lifters. Whatever, what happens is that injuries do crop up more often, and they take them out for a little bit longer. The other scenario then is what we have is a master's lifter who is basically not very talented and have had no real athletic history. Okay, the UA, right? The UA, so it's onset of adult athleticism, is a master's athlete who is not very talented, hasn't a lot of physical literacy, has poor mobility, but has a great desire to train, which is always phenomenal. What you have to do in that scenario is you really have to preempt injuries. You do have to be cautious. So when we have that lifelong athlete, we can go, they understand the nature of the game, they understand that injuries happen in sports, psychologically and physically they're ready, they're resilient physically and psychologically to suffer injuries like this, so it's okay for them. However, with our kind of dog shit athletes are people who are just not a lot of strawberry jam. So we were saying where you can't make strawberry jam out of dog shit. So if you're people who are kind of genetic muck, who are not so great, but are still lovely people and they're great fun to coach and they're very enjoyable to coach, I might add, you just have to be real cautious with injuries coming up, because sometimes these injuries are psychologically very damaging or very hard for that athlete to get over because they're not used to pain, especially this pain kind of transfers over to their real life. For example, when they are finding it difficult to work or just be kind of concentrating their work because they're in pain, and also their body seems to be less able to reform themselves from these injuries. Oftentimes these injuries either through a lack of experience with pain or very possibly just their organism is not well adapted to, or is not very resilient to sports. So then when they do get these injuries often are a lot bigger of a magnitude. So they won't be recurring injuries. Sometimes they'll just be new injuries, and they will be of a bigger magnitude, brand new. So they will be oftentimes harder to come back from, harder for that athlete to psychologically come back from. So also the issue with this as well, in the kind of not so strawberry jam athletes, is that we do see as well is that these injuries kind of just come out of nowhere as much as they can. So oftentimes injuries are never planned. Of course, you don't plan to get injuries. You don't. Oftentimes people get injured, they'll ignore stuff. I have seen though is with the kind of non-ideal masters athletes is that you see totally fine, mobility is getting better, stability is getting better, strength's getting better, confidence is getting better, and then we'll see a random injury. It'll be back, leg, knee, something like that, when hopefully they've reassured me that there was no pain prior until the event. And so that then is something you need to kind of look at yourself, like, are you former good athletes and you can kind of progress as normal, or are you an athlete who hasn't done a lot of training? So then you need to be really, really cautious with preempting your stuff.
I'm just reading down through the comments here. There's some ones that I can kind of shout at people fairly quickly. So Patrick Miller's asking about what equipment he'd need for the accessory arc. Somebody like really nicely said, go look at the Hayden video, but Hayden's on a custom powerlifting program. So Patrick, if you're watching, you need a barbell, you need some plates, some dumbbells would be ideal, but you don't need them, or like a kettlebell would be ideal, but you don't need it. A bench, obviously, and squat racks. Some TheraBands for doing face pulls. Everything else.
And you should get your Romero squatting in the split machine, the pad on.
But yeah, everything else you can do. So with the powerlifting blocks and all the blocks now at this stage, if you're like training at home or training in a home gym and you don't have equipment for it, we have substitutions for all the exercises. So you just have to ask us and we'll sort you out.
I don't want to talk about that.
Okay. Someone's asking for. Okay, this is the last question.
What is it?
The angry about training.
Oh yeah, you love that.
Do you want to do that?
No, you can do it.
Okay, so Joe Boyle asks, is it normal to get unusually angry, irritable after a hard workout? I get really angry and frustrated at terribly minor things after a heavy session and find it hard to relax, especially if I blast a fat Red Bull after the workout. No is the answer. But there's a reason. Well, there could be copious reasons it's happening, but there are a few reasons it tends to happen, right? When you look at training and what training does and the mindset we bring into training and the mindset, how our mindset changes during training, we're triggering or we're erring on triggering a fight or flight response constantly, right? If you've been listening to our stuff for the last few weeks, you might have heard Jeff talk about nasal breathing versus mouth breathing and how nasal breathing is better because it doesn't put us into a fight or flight response. And we keep all these good things like being relaxed, having better peripheral vision, being able to focus on a broad range of things. When you go and train, especially if you're lifting heavy weights, your fight or flight response is what kicks in, and that fight or flight response is what triggers everything. So a release of epinephrine, a release of cortisol, a host of hormone cascades which allows you to lift heavy weights, which is the reason people get pumped up. Same reason your blood pressure increases, you have some vasodilation, you have increased heart rate, you have increased core body temperature. All of these things happen due to hormone cascades. What happens though is if we're going into training with the wrong mindset, or if we're looking for the wrong things from our training session. So if you're looking to go into training and be the strongest man in the world, or you're looking to put all your life's problems into a barbell and plates, or you're looking to suddenly have this huge stress relieving experience, that's not what training is going to offer. And that's why exercise doesn't often work as an intervention in like certain groups for anxiety. Oftentimes it works very well. Sometimes it doesn't work at all because the environment in which we exercise and the actual activity of exercising is incredibly stressful. So if you're going to a gym and you're surrounded by straight up killers, or it's people are driving you on, or on the opposite end of the scale, if there's other people there you don't know and you're slightly nervous and you're not getting the right progress, like things aren't going as well, you're not squatting as much as the guy next to you, all of these things can negatively impact our mindset. what I would say is just start writing down a few things you want to achieve in sessions. So if it's like after a hard workout, like what's a hard workout? Is a hard workout doing 5x5 at 75% in the squat? Or is a hard workout doing push-ups and air squats until you vomit? So write down what you want to actually do in the session, and this is super simple. So you just have 3 things, and it might be good form on squats. It might be do all my accessories. And then last thing might be get finished by 7 p.m. Start setting these things out and understand that you're actually achieving something in the workout. When you're training, you're not just training to make yourself tired, right? And I know a lot of people do that, but you're training to bring about some sort of adaptation or to get something positive from training or to evoke a certain feeling in yourself. So make sure you're actually trying to achieve something, write down what you want to achieve, then go and achieve it. And it should help just to limit those kind of feelings of extreme stress or extreme anxiety, because like those feelings of stress are really positive. They're the reason you can lift big weights, run fast times, jump higher. But obviously if you're going home and kicking the waste paper basket out from under your desk, it's not much good.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thanks for watching. We will upload this immediately after. We'll just put it up. If people like to watch them. For obviously anyone watching this will already know, but I'll just be clipping these and putting up some of the more unique answers next few days. Ivan will be up, our interview, a podcast with Ivan will be up today in a few hours, sometime this evening. And I'll put up my training from Belfast from my visit to Clarence tomorrow.
The big lifts?
The big lifts. So I did 150, 170, which is pretty good considering.
That's a legit 150 too.
Yeah.
170 was good too.
Yeah, 170 was good. I was happy with 170.
Yeah.
So yeah, stay tuned for that crack.
Just for everyone else who asked questions that we didn't get to answer, we might just try and screenshot those and try and just answer them in separate videos.
No, she'll be there.
They'll be there.
Yeah. We can get
but we really appreciate you commenting.
Yes.
And obviously tuning in and watching, but we really do appreciate the comments. Thanks very much for that.
Yep. Ender.
Okay.